When I first moved into Maple Ridge Estates, I thought I had finally escaped the chaos of city living. The neighborhood looked like something out of a magazine: manicured lawns, perfect sidewalks, and clean, quiet streets. Everything was run under the watchful eye of the HOA, led by a woman named Karen Whitfield, who prided herself on keeping the community orderly and uniform. At first, I didn't think much of her constant reminders and warning letters. I figured she was just doing her job. But soon, I realized Karen didn't care about order. She cared about control. The first signs of trouble appeared in front of my house, literally. A few cracks started forming in the asphalt right at the edge of my driveway. At first, they were small, easy to ignore. But within weeks, those tiny fractures spread into long, jagged scars that ran down the street like veins. Rainwater began pooling in them, and each passing car made the cracks worse. I thought the HOA would handle it. After all, that's what we paid for: street maintenance, landscaping, and repairs. But when I brought it up at the next community meeting, Karen brushed it off. She claimed the road wasn't scheduled for maintenance until next quarter, and that budget reallocations had delayed repairs. I didn't question it at the time, but as weeks turned into months, I noticed other streets in the community being repaved, except mine. Soon, the road became so bad that my car's suspension started taking damage. Delivery trucks avoided the area entirely. One neighbor even tripped on a chunk of broken asphalt and twisted her ankle. Still, Karen and the HOA board did nothing. I began to suspect something deeper, maybe even personal, behind their inaction. Then came the notice, a neatly folded envelope in my mailbox, stamped with the HOA logo. Inside was a warning, not about the road but about my driveway. They claimed the cracks were unsightly and that I had 10 days to address them or face fines. I stood there staring at that letter, speechless. The very cracks they refused to fix had now become my responsibility in their eyes. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I realized Karen wasn't just negligent, she was manipulative. She wanted control, and ignoring my requests was her way of reminding me who held the power. But I wasn't about to let her win. I decided to document everything: every email, every notice, every complaint left unanswered. I even took videos showing how the cracks worsened over time. My plan was simple: build a record strong enough to expose their negligence. But as I gathered evidence, I stumbled upon something surprising. The HOA's annual budget report. It was publicly accessible to all members, but most people never bothered reading it. When I did, I discovered that our street had been allocated funds for resurfacing, the same funds Karen claimed didn't exist. That discovery sent me spiraling down a rabbit hole of questions. If the money was there, where did it go? Why were other streets repaired first? And why was Karen so determined to ignore our section of the neighborhood? The more I looked into it, the clearer it became. The HOA wasn't just mismanaging funds, it was redirecting them. A landscaping company, listed on the budget, had been overpaid by thousands, and the address of that company traced back to Karen's brother-in-law. It was starting to look like corruption hidden behind community regulations. But I didn't have proof yet, only suspicion, and I knew Karen was careful. She would never leave an obvious trail. So I decided to play it smart. I continued attending meetings, pretending to accept her excuses while quietly preparing my next move. By midsummer, the road outside my home had turned into a complete hazard. The cracks had deepened into potholes that filled with muddy water after every rain. The mail carrier even complained that her truck's tires were getting stuck. That's when I made my decision. If the HOA refused to fix the street, I would do it myself. I started by calling a few local contractors. Most gave similar quotes: expensive but fair. The total cost would be several $1,000s, including resurfacing and sealing. I didn't hesitate. I hired the crew and scheduled the repair for the following week. When the trucks arrived early one morning, the noise immediately caught Karen's attention. From her porch across the cul-de-sac, she watched the workers tearing up the broken asphalt, her expression tightening with every minute. I could feel her glare even from a distance. I didn't say a word. I just stood by, documenting the process, every receipt and transaction carefully saved. By the end of the second day, the street looked brand new, smooth, clean, and perfectly leveled. Neighbors came out to thank me, some even offering to chip in. But I had something else in mind. I wasn't doing this out of goodwill. I was doing it to prove a point. Once the job was complete, I drafted an invoice addressed to the HOA. The total matched the contractor's cost, plus a modest penalty for delayed action. Exactly the kind of penalty Karen loved imposing on residents. I attached copies of all receipts, the before and after photos, and the section of the bylaws stating the HOA's duty to maintain shared roads. Then I emailed it directly to the board. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of satisfaction. I had fixed the problem they ignored, and I had every right to demand reimbursement. But deep down, I knew Karen wouldn't let this slide quietly. She thrived on control, and I had just challenged it in the most public way possible. The response came faster than I expected. Within 2 days, I received another envelope, thicker this time. It wasn't a reimbursement, it was a fine. They claimed I had performed unauthorized modifications on community property and violated HOA protocol. The fine was almost half the amount I had spent repairing the road. That's when I realized this wasn't just about asphalt or cracks anymore. This was about power. Karen wanted to make an example out of me, but she didn't know that I had already prepared for this. Every receipt, every message, every ignored complaint was now evidence. And I wasn't backing down. As the sun set over my freshly repaired street, I looked at the smooth, black surface glowing under the fading light. It wasn't just a road anymore. It was a line drawn in the sand. Karen thought she could fine me into submission. But this time, she had picked the wrong homeowner, because what she didn't know was that I was about to take the fight public. The morning after I received that fine notice, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the letter for nearly an hour. The words almost didn't seem real. Unauthorized modification of community property. Violation of Article 9.4. Fine due within 10 business days. It was absurd. I had fixed what the HOA had neglected for nearly a year, and somehow I was the one in violation. It wasn't the money that bothered me, it was the principle. The HOA had taken our fees, ignored their obligations, and then punished me for stepping up. I knew Karen was behind it. Her signature was at the bottom of the notice, neat and self-satisfied, like she'd just won another round in her petty little game. But what she didn't realize was that this time I was playing a different game. That morning, I compiled everything into a single digital folder: invoices, emails, photos, meeting notes, the HOA budget documents, everything. I even created a timeline showing how long the road had been ignored. Then, I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board. I stated in professional terms that I had repaired a neglected section of community infrastructure after repeated requests were ignored. I cited the exact clauses in the bylaws requiring the HOA to maintain shared property and demanded reimbursement, plus the fine reversed within 14 days. I sent the email to every board member, CC'd Karen, and sat back. For the first time in months, I felt calm. I had the facts, the proof, and the law on my side. But deep down, I knew Karen wouldn't let this end quietly. It didn't take long. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with an email from the HOA board secretary, clearly written under Karen's influence. The message said they had reviewed my claim and found that my actions were unauthorized, unapproved, and a liability risk. They refused reimbursement, upheld the fine, and warned that Further non-compliance could lead to legal action. I almost laughed. Legal action? Against me? For fixing a road? That was the moment I decided to escalate, publicly. I created a detailed post in our neighborhood's online forum, attaching before and after photos of the road, the budget documents, and the invoices. I didn't insult anyone, didn't accuse anyone by name. I simply laid out the facts. Within hours, the post blew up. Dozens of neighbors commented, furious that their fees were being misused while repairs were ignored. Several said they'd also had maintenance requests denied for budget reasons. By the next morning, the HOA office phone must have been ringing non-stop because Karen called me directly, the first time she'd ever done that. Her voice was calm at first, almost rehearsed. She said my post was spreading misinformation and causing division. I didn't respond. I just let her talk. Then she mentioned the word defamation, and that's when I knew I had her rattled. After that call, things in the neighborhood started to change. HOA inspectors began showing up more frequently, photographing lawns, mailboxes, fences, anything they could find wrong. It was intimidation, plain and simple. But it backfired. Neighbors who'd stayed silent before were now openly questioning the board's decisions. Some even demanded an audit. That's when I made my next move. I sent my invoice again, this time through certified mail, with a notice of intent to escalate to small claims court if not paid within 7 days. I didn't actually expect them to pay. What I wanted was pressure, something official enough to make them nervous, and it worked. A few days later, I received a letter marked urgent, confidential, from the HOA attorney. The letter tried to intimidate me, warning that my actions exposed the association to liability and that I was personally responsible for any damages arising from unapproved work. It was legal jargon, carefully worded to sound threatening. But I noticed something interesting. The letter never once denied my claim that the HOA had failed to perform maintenance. They were trying to scare me into silence, not prove me wrong. So I doubled down. I filed an official complaint with the county's Community Oversight Office, attaching all the documentation. I also submitted a request for the HOA's financial transparency records, something every homeowner had the right to review under state law. It was a tedious process, but I knew that once I had those records, the truth about their budget reallocations would surface. In the meantime, the neighborhood tension kept building. Karen's once loyal supporters were starting to question her leadership. At the next HOA meeting, turnout was unusually high. The atmosphere felt different, uneasy, skeptical, like everyone had suddenly realized the emperor had no clothes. Karen tried to control the narrative, speaking about unauthorized actions and procedural violations. But the room wasn't with her. People wanted answers. Why had their road maintenance been delayed? Why were repairs happening selectively? Why was a resident being fined for fixing what the board ignored? I stayed quiet through most of the meeting, watching her struggle to maintain her composure. Then, near the end, I stood up and calmly announced that I had filed a formal request for a financial audit. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's face turned pale. After that meeting, everything changed. The HOA suddenly began approving small repairs around the community. Potholes, light fixtures, sidewalks. It was obvious damage control, but I didn't care. I wanted accountability, not appeasement. A week later, my oversight complaint triggered an official review. The county requested all financial statements, invoices, and vendor contracts from the HOA. Within days, panic spread across the board. Emails flew back and forth, emergency meetings were scheduled, and the tone of their correspondence shifted completely. Then, something unexpected happened. I received a new email from the HOA treasurer, not Karen. It was polite, even apologetic. They said they were reconsidering my invoice, and asked for a breakdown of expenses. It was clear the pressure was working, but I wasn't about to stop there. I knew that once corruption is cornered, it doesn't surrender. It fights back. Sure enough, the following week, someone anonymously posted flyers around the neighborhood calling me a troublemaker and a threat to community unity. They even claimed I had profited off the road repair. The paper looked official, printed on the same stationery the HOA used. I had no doubt it came from Karen's side. But instead of reacting angrily, I let it play out. Because now, every move she made only made her look guiltier. And when the county's audit team finally arrived to review the HOA's records, Karen couldn't hide anymore. The auditors discovered discrepancies in multiple accounts, overpayments to contractors, unexplained withdrawals, and missing receipts. It wasn't just negligence, it was fraud. The same landscaping company that had been overpaid. It was indeed linked to Karen's family. The audit team immediately froze all discretionary spending and demanded a board restructuring. The fallout was swift. Board members began distancing themselves from Karen. The treasurer resigned. Rumors spread that legal action was being considered, and as for my invoice, it was finally acknowledged. The HOA reimbursed me in full, including the penalty I had added, and issued a formal apology for the fine. But victory didn't feel as sweet as I expected. My street was fixed, yes, but the neighborhood's trust was shattered. What was once a quiet, friendly place had turned into a battleground of suspicion and whispers. And Karen, she wasn't done yet. She disappeared from meetings for a few weeks, only to resurface later with a new plan, something she called the Restoration Initiative. On paper, it was about rebuilding trust and restructuring the HOA. But I could sense it wasn't about restoration at all. It was about revenge. Because when people like Karen lose control, they don't accept defeat. They plot their comeback. And I could feel one coming. After the audit exposed those financial discrepancies, Maple Ridge Estates felt like a neighborhood holding its breath. The usual calm had been replaced with quiet tension, suspicious glances during morning walks, whispered conversations at mailboxes, and board members suddenly acting overly polite. For a moment, I thought it might all be over. The HOA had reimbursed me. The county was investigating, and Karen had disappeared from sight. But I should have known better. When Karen lost her control over the board, she didn't vanish out of shame. She went underground to plan her comeback, and when she returned, she came back louder, sharper, and more vindictive than ever. It started subtly. Flyers appeared around the neighborhood again, this time advertising an emergency community meeting hosted by Karen herself. The notice claimed she had new evidence that I had misled the board and manipulated public perception. The wording was calculated, just vague enough to sound serious, just scandalous enough to turn heads. I didn't want to go, but I knew I had to. If I didn't show up, she'd spin her story unchecked. That evening, the community center was packed. People who hadn't attended a meeting in years showed up just to see the drama unfold. Karen stood at the front, wearing her usual polished smile, the same smile she used when issuing fines or lecturing residents about standards. When she started speaking, her voice carried that self-assured tone that used to silence the room. She claimed the audit was misinterpreted, that the discrepancies were clerical errors, and that I had misrepresented the HOA to the county. Then she revealed her so-called evidence, a stack of printed screenshots showing my online posts and comments, all taken out of context. For a few minutes it almost worked. People began whispering. Some looked uncertain. But I noticed something. No one looked angry at me. They looked tired. Tired of excuses. Tired of her voice. When she tried to paint herself as the victim of a smear campaign, the room erupted in questions. Why were her relatives' companies on the HOA payroll? Why had she signed off on payments without full board approval? Why was she focusing on one homeowner when the audit's findings implicated her? For the first time since I'd lived there, Karen didn't have answers. Her confidence cracked. Then, something happened I'll never forget. The county auditor herself walked into the meeting. She hadn't planned to speak publicly, but word of the emergency meeting had reached her office, and she decided to attend. She stepped to the front, introduced herself, and calmly explained that the financial irregularities were real, not clerical errors, not misinterpretations. She confirmed that funds had been misused and that a formal investigation was ongoing. The room went silent. You could feel Karen's world collapsing in real time. The auditor continued, explaining that, pending the outcome of the investigation, the current HOA board would be temporarily suspended and replaced with a provisional committee appointed by the county's oversight department. Karen tried to interrupt, but the auditor shut her down firmly, stating that further interference could result in legal consequences. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Years of frustration and ignored complaints had finally caught up with the person responsible. Karen's face went pale, her composure gone. She grabbed her papers and stormed out of the room without another word. The crowd erupted into quiet applause, not loud, not mocking, just a collective sigh of relief. It was over. But for me, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like cleanup after a storm. The HOA wasn't just corrupt because of one person, it was broken because everyone had been too afraid or too indifferent to question it. Karen had thrived on silence, and it took one road, one invoice, and one stubborn homeowner to shatter that silence. Over the next few weeks, the Provisional Committee took over operations. Transparency became the new buzzword. Financial records were published online for all residents to see. Maintenance requests were tracked and responded to publicly. For the first time, things actually worked the way they were supposed to. But the damage Karen left behind lingered. Trust didn't rebuild overnight. Some neighbors still viewed each other with suspicion, wondering who had known what, who had looked the other way. And even though the HOA was rebuilding itself, the scars of corruption ran deep. As for Karen, she was officially removed from the board. Rumor had it she'd been fined for mismanagement and banned from holding any position in a community association again. Some said she was planning to move away. Others claimed she was lawyering up. I didn't care. Her reign was over. One afternoon, weeks after the storm had settled, I took a walk down my street. The asphalt still looked smooth and dark, the same surface I'd paid to restore. The cracks that started it all were long gone, but I could still remember every one of them. They weren't just flaws in the pavement. They were symbols of what happens when people in power forget who they serve. A few neighbors waved as I passed. Some thanked me quietly. Others avoided the topic entirely, as if afraid the peace might shatter if they brought it up again. I didn't blame them. For a long time, even I couldn't believe how far things had gone. But there was one thing I did do. I printed and framed the original invoice I sent to the HOA. It hung in my office, a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the silence, even when it costs you. Months later, the county released its final report on the audit. It confirmed what I had suspected all along. Years of financial manipulation, improper reimbursements, and personal gain disguised as community improvements. The report became public record, and with it came a wave of new policies to prevent this kind of abuse in other neighborhoods. I didn't expect to become the face of reform. But somehow, that's what happened. I was invited to speak at a regional homeowners forum about accountability and resident rights. It felt surreal standing there, telling my story, knowing it all began with a few cracks in the road. As I wrapped up that talk, I said something that made the audience quiet. Sometimes it starts small. A crack, a letter, a fine. But if you don't stand up early, those cracks don't just stay in the road. They spread through the entire community. That night, as I drove home, I passed the entrance of Maple Ridge Estates. The streetlights reflected perfectly on the smooth blacktop. No potholes, no damage, no signs of neglect. The place looked peaceful again, almost too peaceful, as if the chaos had never happened. But I knew the truth. Peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing up, even when it's uncomfortable. The next morning, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just a single folded piece of paper inside. It wasn't a threat or an apology. It was a note, written in shaky handwriting that simply said, "Thank you for fixing what we all were too scared to face." I never found out who wrote it. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe someone from the board, maybe even someone who used to support Karen. But it didn't matter. That note was the real payment. Not the reimbursement check, not the public apology, not even the vindication. It was proof that what I did mattered. Because sometimes standing up to a corrupt HOA isn't about revenge or money. It's about reminding people that one person can make a difference, even if it starts with nothing more than a broken road and a stubborn homeowner who refuses to stay silent.